Welcome back. We're talking about China's growth strategy. Joining us now from New York is Fred Hu. He's the founder and chairman of the Primavera Capital Group, a China-based global investment firm. Also with us, Kerry Brown. He's the director of the Lao China Institute at King's College in London. James Nolt focuses on the influence of business on international relations. He joins us from New York as well. And with us from Hong Kong is economist and strategic advisor Geng Xiao. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Let me start with Fred this time. And Fred, we have been talking about these challenges, economic challenges that China faces in the years ahead. The Central Committee is talking about the next 5-year plan right now. From an investment perspective, what does China need to do to encourage growth and inspire more confidence?
Right. China has come a long way, has been enormously successful, but right now is under tremendous pressure. There are clear limitations of traditional growth model, whether you look at the environmental pressure, the traditional manufacturing industry, and so on and so forth. So really, the new 5-year plan, put emphasis on how to facilitate China's transition into a new economic paradigm, focused on consumer spending and the service sector, and also obviously environmentally more friendly, greener economic growth. So all those are very important directions, and the 5-year plan need to articulate a very coherent strategy to support and facilitate China's shift into the new growth model.
Right, and these shifts that you talk about, Fred, I mean, as you've just pointed out, consumer spending being one of them. What about innovation? The China Daily newspaper says one of the major goals for the next 5 years is promoting innovation. What does that mean? Does it mean that China, or is it an acknowledgement by China that it needs to be more than just a manufacturing center? It needs to be a place where products and services are designed and built from the ground up.
That's clearly an imperative for China to embrace great innovation, because China today is maybe the world factory manufacturing powerhouse, but it's mostly specialized in low-end, traditional, low value-added, labor-intensive manufacturing. So, China needs to really move up the economic ladder. More productivity, more technology progress. So instead of being sometimes derisively called a copycat or sweatshop, China should really become a major global innovation powerhouse.
Kerry, moving on to something else, Britain's Financial Times newspaper says that there is a need for deep reforms, especially in the state-owned enterprise sector in China. How does China reform this huge sector of its economy, short, of course, of privatizing it?
Well, in the last couple of years, certainly at the third plenum in 2013, it talked about creating hybrid models where you had non-state companies, non-entrepreneurial companies being able to sort of buy parts of traditionally state-owned enterprises. And so you're reducing the amount of the sort of economy that is primarily in the hands of the state. This hasn't really happened so much now, but I presume that in the next 5 years, as you try and unleash what Li Keqiang, the premier, has called new spaces for growth within the indigenous Chinese economy, then you try and create these hybrid models. So they've been talking about maybe logistics, maybe some of the, kind of the railways, or those areas which on the whole have involved a great deal of state capital investment, and these becoming more into the sort of arms of the private sector. This is not so easy. Obviously, it creates a great deal of a sort of new sort of economy where you've got hybridity, you've got state and non-state companies working in a way that they've never really worked in China together. But there's certainly models for how this has happened elsewhere in the world, so at least in that sense there's precedence.
Xia, China has intensified anti-corruption efforts since the CPC's 18th National Congress. It's dealt with a number of corrupt officials, some of them very high up. In that article I referred to earlier, you suggested that the, quote, bureaucracy's increasing reluctance to take bold action is an unintended consequence of anti-corruption efforts. Could you explain that to us? How does that happen?
Well, I think corruption has to be stopped and this is part of the accountability, because you need to allow the market to play a greater role, and the government need to actually to facilitate the market, including define property rights and also resolve disputes through the judicial systems. So all those market infrastructures, I mean the role of providing basic market infrastructure relies on the government. So a clean government is essential, and China is moving very fast in this front. And that's a necessity. Although in the short term, the anti-corruption actually put a lot of pressures on the local government and other managers. They do not have incentives to work hard as in the past, and that's a short-term problem. But I think in the long term, this has to be resolved to gain the confidence both from Chinese people and also from people outside of China.
Let's go back to Fred. Fred, China's economic growth rate is 6.9% for the third quarter of this year. Previous five-year plans have, of course, included these growth targets. How important are these growth targets, and what do you anticipate will be the growth target?
Well, China has stated the goal by 2020 to double the gross economic product from the level in 2010. So that basically implies a certain annualized GDP growth rate over this period of time during the next 5-year period. In the past, China really attached a huge amount of importance to numeric target. So in recent years has been sort of de-emphasized a little bit. So I would still, in the context of China, there's still significant growth potential. There's still catch up to do. China is a solid middle-income country today, but not yet a high-income economy. So to maintain a moderately rapid rate of growth, like in line with the underlying potential of the economy, I do think it makes a lot of sense from policy point of view. It also, give guidance to business sector and to private citizens. So I expect China will be able to maintain, 6.5 to 7% like the range with some fluctuations, but over the last few years, there's been so much anxiety and concern about the slowdown in China. I would say, much of that concern probably is not so warranted, because China will still remain one of the fastest growing major economies on the planet.
And Fred, what is the minimum growth rate that China will need just to be able to absorb new work seekers that are coming on the market every year?
Well, I wish I could find this minimum level of acceptable growth just for employment's sake. But the fact is, so this year clearly is a very, very difficult year for Chinese economy, and there's been so much concern around the world. We just had 7-8 million fresh graduates from universities across China, and fortunately, most of those fresh graduates have been able to enter the workforce, mostly absorbed by the service sector, which has been booming, despite the manufacturing slump in China right now. So it's really the composition of the growth. A few years ago, when China was growing double-digit, actually China had a greater difficulty creating new jobs particularly for college graduates, because that kind of growth was driven by government infrastructure, by state-owned companies, which did not generate enough opportunities. Today, overall headline growth rate is lower, but it's driven more by private sector, more by service sector. So actually, there's better promise of job creation, actually quality job creation.
James, final question, and this is looking ahead. I just have a little bit of time left. Xinhua, the Chinese news agency, is reporting that during the past 5 years, urban unemployment has been kept low. The average lifespan has been increased by a year, and almost all Chinese people are now covered by medical insurance. China is also the only developing country that's met the goals of the Millennium Development Goals of reducing poverty by half. Does this augur well for the future?
Well, certainly China's made very impressive progress, but there are also some great problems that have been mentioned. For example, the greatly increased urban congestion and very serious air pollution. Furthermore, the slowing down of growth, because in some areas there's been overinvestment, and so it's difficult to sustain the growth at anywhere close to the rate that it's been in recent years. It's a little bit like the problem that Japan faced after 3 or 4 decades of very fast growth and then began to stagnate. So people are concerned that although, yes, China's made very impressive progress during the recent decades, it may not be able to sustain it, and it has new problems such as pollution that have been caused by that very growth that need to be addressed now.
Xia, what is your view? We've seen some of what the Central Committee has been talking about right now. Are you confident that China is heading in the right direction?
Well, I'm quite confident that they have done a lot of aggressive reforms in the past, and going to future, you know, the main problem is really trying to mobilize the local and private sector to really pursue quality and sustainable growth, and that's a long-term process. Needs some patience. And the short-term volatilities is understandable because they have done so many reforms in such a short period of time and creates a lot of volatilities. But if you look at what they have done since the last few years, they have the amount of actual substantive reforms are more than the last 10 years, I would say. So I'm actually quite confident that over the next 5 years, the quality of growth in China will improve significantly.
And that's where we have to leave it. Gang Xiao, Kerry Brown, Fred Hu, and James Knoll. Thanks to all of you for joining us.